The drive stretched endlessly. 2 hours of coastline, cliffs, and a silence so thick it pressed against the car windows. Grace stared out at the horizon where the sky bled into the sea, wondering how something so vast could feel this suffocating. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white against the leather. Every few miles he tried to speak, but the words never made it past his lips. They were going to the ocean to reconnect. That was the therapist's word. Soft, optimistic, almost absurd. After a year of separation, after months of sleeping in separate beds, separate lives, they were supposed to find each other again. Grace wasn't sure there was anything left to find. She rolled the window down a crack. The cold air stung her face. "You could have taken the inland route," she said. Ethan's reply came slow. "You always liked the view." "I used to," she murmured. They passed a sign, Whispering Cove, 5 miles. The letters looked worn, half erased, as if the town itself had been trying to forget its name. Grace watched the waves below, sharp and metallic under the fading sun. They reminded her of arguments, the kind that begin quietly and end in ruin. He finally spoke again, voice barely audible. "Let's not fight this weekend, okay?" She smiled, brittle and small. "We don't fight anymore, Ethan. We just stopped talking." The rest of the drive was swallowed by silence, the kind that fills every crevice until it becomes its own presence. When they finally reached the inn, a weathered building perched above the cliffs, the sea roared beneath it, endless and merciless. Grace stepped out of the car, breathing in the salt and decay. The wind whipped her hair across her face like a curtain. She looked toward the horizon, feeling something shift deep inside her. Not peace, but the memory of drowning. And somewhere behind her, Ethan whispered, "Let's start over." But the ocean answered first. The innkeeper handed them a brass key attached to a smooth piece of driftwood. "Room 7. Ocean view," she said with a smile, too practiced to be sincere. Grace followed Ethan down the narrow hallway, the air thick with the scent of salt and aging wood. Their footsteps echoed like whispers in an empty church. When Ethan opened the door, the ocean flooded the room. Its sound, its smell, its slow, rhythmic breath. "Beautiful," she said quietly. "Yeah," he replied, already checking his phone. The glow of the screen reflected in his eyes, turning them cold and distant. Grace watched him for a moment before unpacking her bag, every movement deliberate, folding clothes, lining up toiletries, performing the illusion of normalcy. Dinner was quiet. He scrolled through messages between bites of grilled fish. When she asked who he was texting, he said, "Just work." On a weekend? It never stops. Neither did her doubts. Later, she stood at the window, the ocean a black mirror beneath the moonlight. Its waves rolled in slow, hypnotic patterns, like something breathing, waiting. She tried to open the window for air, but it was painted shut. Locked, sealed by time and salt. Behind her, Ethan moved restlessly in bed. She turned off the lamp and lay beside him, her mind circling the silence. Sometime after midnight, she woke to his voice. Low, broken, almost tender. "Mia," he whispered. Grace froze. The name cut through her like glass. She watched his face in the dim light from the curtain gap. Peaceful, almost loving. It wasn't her name he was dreaming. The sea crashed louder outside, as if reacting, as if listening. She whispered his name once. He didn't stir. Grace turned away, her pulse racing, staring into the dark where the locked window stood. It reflected her faint outline, a woman trapped in glass, unable to open the air around her. For the first time, she wondered if coming here had been his idea of healing, or her punishment for believing he'd changed. Outside, the tide rose higher. Inside, her trust began to sink, and by morning, she would find proof that ghosts don't only live in the water. Sometimes, they sleep beside you. Morning crept into the room like an uninvited guest, pale, heavy, and cold. The waves outside were quieter now, almost polite, as if pretending nothing had happened the night before. Ethan was already dressed, sitting by the window with his phone. He looked calm, too calm, the way people do when they're hiding panic behind stillness. Grace showered, dressed, and began unpacking the last of their things. His wallet had fallen between the suitcases. Black leather, old, scuffed. She reached for it absent-mindedly. intending to place it on the nightstand. But when it opened, a photograph slipped out and fluttered to the floor. A younger Ethan laughing, his arm around a woman with wind-tangled auburn hair, the ocean behind them. For a second, Grace forgot to breathe. The background looked familiar, the same coastline below this very inn. The cliffs curved the same way, the sky bruised with that same storm-gray tint. Her chest tightened. Not a stranger, she realized. She had seen that face once, on a message that came to her phone by accident 3 years ago. Lena, the name struck her like thunder through calm water. Ethan, she called softly. What's this? He turned, his face drained of color. Where did you find that? In your wallet. He moved quickly, too quickly, snatching it from her hand. That's old. It's nothing. Nothing? Her voice cracked. You're holding her like she was your life. He looked away, jaw tightening. It was years ago, Grace, before we even— Don't lie to me. His eyes flickered, the lie dying halfway through his throat. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. She was a mistake. Grace's heart hammered. Then why keep her picture? No answer. Just the soft crash of waves outside and the faint tremor in his breathing. She turned toward the locked window, staring at her reflection, pale, trembling, fractured into panes of glass. The ocean behind it shimmered like a secret she hadn't yet earned the right to know. Ethan placed the photo back in his wallet. Hands unsteady. We came here to move forward, he whispered. But Grace knew some ghosts don't walk behind you. They wait ahead, by the water. Breakfast was served in the inn's small dining room, its windows fogged by sea air. The smell of coffee mixed with salt and something faintly metallic. Grace sat across from Ethan, the untouched plate between them a silent witness. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching him pretend to read the menu. So, she said finally, voice steady. Lena Moore, that's her name, isn't it? He froze for just a moment, a flicker, before lowering the menu. She worked with me, yes. Years ago, worked with you? Grace repeated. Because the way you were holding her didn't look very professional. Ethan sighed, the sound heavy, practiced. Grace, it was a long time ago. You're digging up ghosts. You said this weekend was about moving on. Moving on requires honesty, she said quietly. You can't build anything on a lie. He leaned back, eyes darkening. It was a friendship that got complicated. That's it. Complicated enough for her to haunt your dreams? That landed, his fork stilled midair. Outside, waves struck the rocks, the rhythm perfectly syncing with her heartbeat. Grace felt her voice rising, emotion trembling under her skin. You kept her picture, Ethan, in your wallet. Why? He looked down at his plate. I don't know. Maybe guilt. Or something you're still hiding. He stood abruptly. I came here to fix things, Grace, not to relive the past. The conversation ended there, at least out loud. But silence, she knew, was just another form of confession. Later that afternoon, Grace wandered into town alone. The streets were narrow, lined with peeling signs and fishermen repairing nets. She stopped by a small cafe overlooking the harbor, craving space from his lies. The waitress, an older woman with sharp eyes, brought her tea. Haven't seen you two in a while, she said casually. Grace blinked. Us, the man you're with, Ethan, right? He was here a few months back, with a red-haired woman. The cup trembled in Grace's hand. Are you sure? The woman smiled faintly. Hard to forget her face. She looked sad. Grace left the cafe without finishing her tea, the ocean breeze cutting through her like a blade. By the time she reached the inn, the tide had turned, higher, darker, and ready to drag something hidden back to shore. The storm came that night without warning, a violent, howling wind that rattled the windows and swallowed the inn in darkness. The power flickered once, then vanished completely, plunging everything into the soft pulse of candlelight and thunder. Ethan had gone downstairs to check the generator, leaving Grace alone in the room. The air felt charged, heavy, as if the sea itself had climbed the cliffs and pressed its ear against their walls. She paced the room, her thoughts louder than the storm. The waitress's words from town replayed over and over. He was here a few months ago, with a red-haired woman. A sharp crack of thunder shook the glass. She jumped, and her eyes fell to Ethan's suitcase half-zipped sitting under the bed. Grace hesitated. Then she knelt, hands trembling as she pulled it into the open. Inside lay neatly folded clothes, a bottle of cologne and a bundle of papers tied together with twine. Tucked beneath them was a sealed envelope. Her name wasn't on it, it was addressed to Lena. The handwriting was Ethan's. For a long moment, Grace just stared at it, the candlelight flickering across her pale fingers. Then she opened it. The letter smelled faintly of sea salt and old ink. Lena, I don't know how to make this right. I thought distance would be enough, but I still hear you every time I look at the water. I never meant for the ocean to take you. Grace's vision blurred. The next lines were smudged. Maybe by water, maybe by tears. You said you'd tell her everything. I should have stopped you. Her hands shook. The candle flickered violently, guttering low. She shoved the letter back into the suitcase just as footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside, soaked from rain, eyes darting to her and then to the bed. Power's still out, he said softly. Grace forced a nod, her pulse pounding. I noticed. He looked at her too long, a look that lingered. Suspicious, knowing. Outside, lightning tore through the sky, illuminating the ocean for a single blinding instant. When it faded, everything was dark again, except for the secret burning between them. The storm dragged on through the night, its fury crawling over the cliffs like a living thing. Grace sat by the window, pretending to watch the lightning, but her mind throbbed with the words from the letter. I never meant for the ocean to take you. Ethan paced the room behind her, the floorboards creaking under his weight. His silence felt heavier than the thunder. Finally she turned. Who's Lena to you, really? He didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the rain-streaked glass. Don't, she said, her voice rising. Don't stand there and lie again. I found the letter, Ethan. His head snapped toward her. You went through my things? You hid them. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to pause, holding its breath. Then Ethan sighed, running a trembling hand through his hair. Fine, he said softly. You want the truth? You'll get it. He sank into the chair opposite her, shoulders slumped. Lena and I met here last year. After we separated, Grace's heart cracked like ice. You came back to this place? She asked me to, he murmured. She said she wanted to clear things up. To make peace. Peace. Grace laughed, hollow and sharp. Was that before or after you told her you were married? He flinched. She knew. She always knew. Then what was she going to reveal? His eyes flicked up to hers, haunted, uncertain. That night by the pier, things got out of hand. She was drinking, yelling, saying she'd tell you everything. Tried to calm her down. His voice cracked. She slipped, Grace. I swear to God she slipped. Grace stared at him, searching his face for guilt. Or worse, truth. And you just left her there? I went into the water after her, he said. I tried to save her, but the tide... He broke off, shaking his head. It pulled her under. I thought she was gone forever. Grace's breath came unevenly. You didn't tell anyone. He looked up, his eyes wet with something between shame and anger. Would you have believed me? The wind screamed through the cracks in the window, scattering their words into the dark. Grace whispered. You say she drowned by accident, but the ocean has a way of returning what's unfinished. Ethan's face paled. What are you talking about? Grace turned back to the window. In the distance, the waves glowed faintly under the lightning. The tide's coming in, she said. Maybe it's time we see what it brings back. Morning came gray and trembling, the storm having left the world raw and bruised. Grace awoke to the sound of voices outside, the hum of radios, the shuffle of boots over wet ground. Ethan was already at the window, his face pale. What's happening? She asked, pulling her robe tight. He didn't answer, only pointed toward the shore. Police tape fluttered like torn ribbon along the beach below the inn. Officers knelt near the waterline, their movements careful, reverent. Between them lay a shape, still covered, half swallowed by seaweed. Grace's stomach turned. No, Ethan's voice was barely audible. It can't be her, but it was. By afternoon, the news had spread through the town like wildfire. Body found near Whispering Cove, believed to be missing woman Lena Moore. The knock came soon after. A tall man in a gray coat stood at the door, his badge glinting faintly. Detective Rowan Pierce, he said politely. I'd like a word. Ethan invited him in, his voice brittle. Grace felt the air shift, a weight entering the room that could not be removed. Rowan's eyes moved between them, calm but piercing. You two are staying at the inn? Yes, Ethan said quickly. Locals mentioned seeing you here before, the detective continued. About a year ago, Ethan froze. Grace felt it, the smallest hesitation like a crack forming beneath glass. We came here then, she said, stepping in, but not together. Rowan tilted his head. Interesting. He flipped open his notebook. Lena Moore was seen in this area around that same time. You knew her, Mr. Miller? Ethan's jaw tightened. Briefly. She was a co-worker. The detective's pen paused mid-note. Co-worker, right, his gaze turned to Grace. And you, Mrs. Miller? When did you last see Miss Moore? Grace swallowed hard. I never met her. A silence stretched, heavy, unblinking. Rowan nodded slowly, then closed his notebook. If you remember anything at all, call me. As he left, Grace felt Ethan's hand brush hers. His skin was ice. Outside, the tide whispered against the sand. Patient and knowing, and for the first time, Grace wondered if the ocean had finally chosen a side. The night after the police visit, Grace couldn't sleep. The rhythmic crash of waves below the cliffs seemed louder, as if the ocean itself was whispering her name. Ethan lay beside her, unmoving, his breathing shallow, too controlled to be sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the tarp on the beach, the shape beneath it. The faint line of seaweed tangled like a crown around Lena's hair. Lena Moore. The name echoed in her mind like a tide that refused to retreat. Her thoughts pulled her backward, to that night, the one she'd locked away so deep even memory had learned to tread lightly around it. It had been raining then too. The same ocean, the same cliffs. She remembered driving there after finding Ethan's messages. I need to see you one last time. The words had burned into her like salt on a wound. She hadn't told Ethan she was following him. She'd only watched from the shadows as he met Lena by the pier, his voice soft, his hands trembling. When he left, Grace had stepped out. The confrontation came fast. Rage against sorrow, jealousy against guilt. You took everything from me. Grace had shouted over the wind. Lena's reply was choked, desperate. You don't understand, Grace grabbed her wrist. You ruined my life. Lena's eyes had widened, terrified, as her heel slipped against the slick stone. The scream was brief. The silence that followed was endless. Grace had stood frozen, staring into the dark water where Lena's body disappeared. The waves swallowed her without a trace, as if agreeing to keep a secret. When she finally drove home, she told herself it had been an accident, that the storm, not she, had taken Lena. Now with the body back on shore, the lie trembled like thin glass under her feet. She turned to Ethan, watching the faint movement of his chest. Did he remember too? Did the water whisper to him the same way it whispered to her? Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the sound of the tide rolling closer. It was coming for both of them. The sea, the truth, the past. And this time, it wasn't going to let either one of them go. By morning, the sky had cleared, but the air felt heavier. The kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. The news spread fast. The autopsy had begun, and whispers filled the small coastal town like wind through hollow shells. Detective Rowan arrived at the inn just after sunrise. He greeted them with polite formality, but his eyes gave away the shift, curiosity replaced by suspicion. I'm afraid I'll need to ask you both a few more questions, he said, setting his notebook on the table. Some details have surfaced. Ethan forced a calm nod. Of course. Rowan flipped a page. The coroner found a man's wedding ring tangled in the victim's clothing. It's engraved, EM to GM. That would be yours, wouldn't it, Mr. Miller? Ethan's face drained of color. I lost that ring months ago. Must have fallen off. Grace stared at him, heart pounding. You said you stopped wearing it because it didn't fit anymore. He didn't look at her. I guess I was wrong. Rowan's gaze shifted. There's more. The victim was wearing a bracelet. Her own, but there were fingerprints on it. Yours, Mrs. Miller? Grace's throat tightened. That's impossible. I never touched her? Rowan finished gently. Fingerprints don't lie, ma'am. She turned to Ethan, desperate. You told me she slipped. You said. Ethan's voice rose, sharp and shaking. Don't twist this, Grace. You hated her. You went after her once before. The room went cold. What are you talking about? She whispered. You followed me, he hissed. You were there that night, weren't you? Rowan's pen stilled. "What night?" Ethan hesitated, just long enough for the silence to fill in the answer. Grace's eyes burned with tears. "You think I killed her?" He didn't respond. The accusation hung between them, heavy as the air before thunder. Rowan closed his notebook slowly. It seems the tides brought more than one secret ashore. As he left, the sound of the ocean roared through the window. Grace turned to Ethan. "You're not telling me everything." "And you are?" he said softly. Outside, the sea began to pull back, quiet, patient, preparing for its next rise. The wind began to rise again that evening, dragging the sea into motion. The investigation had left the house heavy with silence, a silence neither of them dared to break. Ethan sat in the corner, his head in his hands, while Grace stood by the window watching the storm roll in. "They're going to arrest me," he said finally. His voice was flat, drained of everything except exhaustion. "Not if you tell them the truth," she whispered. He laughed bitterly. "Truth? We don't even know what that is anymore." Grace turned to him. His eyes were hollow, haunted by something far beyond fear. "You're scaring me, Ethan." "Good," he said softly. "Now you know how it feels." The words cut through her like the wind outside. He stood, pacing, restless, like the storm had crawled inside him. Then without warning, he reached for his coat. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "To end this." Before she could stop him, he opened the door. The gust nearly ripped it from his hands. Rain lashed across his face, but he didn't flinch. He just stepped into the dark. "Ethan!" Grace shouted, chasing after him. Her bare feet hit the wet earth as thunder split the sky. The beach below glimmered with lightning, the waves rising higher with every step. She could barely see him. A dark figure moving toward the water, shoulders bowed, coat flapping like torn wings. "Ethan!" Her voice cracked. "Please don't." He didn't turn. He kept walking until the water swallowed his knees, his waist, his chest. "Come back," she screamed, running toward him. But the wind stole her voice. He stopped just before the next wave struck and looked back once, his expression unreadable, almost calm. Then he stepped forward and the ocean took him. Grace fell to her knees in the sand, her cries drowned by the storm. By morning, the world was quiet again. The police found only footprints leading into the sea, deep, distinct, and solitary. None returned. Detective Rowan stood beside her as she stared at the water. "He's gone," he said gently. But Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "No, the sea doesn't take without giving something back." The ocean had finally gone quiet. No storm, no wind, just the slow, methodical rhythm of waves brushing against the sand like a metronome marking grief. 3 weeks had passed since that night. The police had ended their search after 4 days, declaring Ethan Miller's death a presumed suicide. No body recovered, no trace of him found, just the memory of footprints that led into the sea. Grace attended the inquest, sitting in the back row, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Detective Rowan spoke gently, the way one might talk about weather that can't be controlled. "Sometimes," he said, "the ocean keeps what it wants." The room murmured in agreement, but Grace said nothing. She only stared at her hands, wondering if the tide would ever return them clean. When the proceedings ended, she drove back to the inn. The manager recognized her but said nothing, only handed her the same brass key, the one engraved with 7. The room hadn't changed. The faint scent of salt still clung to the curtains, and the same locked window faced the same relentless sea. Grace set her bag down and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the horizon. "I came back," she whispered to no one. "I kept my promise." Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the water in shades of ash and rust. The tide rolled in, slow and deliberate, almost tender. For the first time, she felt calm, as if he were somewhere just beyond the waves, listening. She stood, walked to the window and reached out to touch the glass. That was when she saw it, a small object glinting in the corner of the sill, Ethan's wedding ring. Her breath caught. She hadn't told anyone about the engraving, EM to GM. The very same ring Detective Rowan said was found with Lena's body. But it was here now, dry, clean, waiting. She reached for it slowly, her reflection bending in the glass beside it. For a moment it wasn't her own face she saw, but Ethan's. The sea outside rippled once, catching the light, and in that flicker, she could have sworn it smiled. Winter came quietly that year, the kind that carried more fog than frost, blurring everything in its path. Grace had moved inland by then, to a small cottage surrounded by bare trees and silence. She told herself it was peace, but it felt more like exile. She wrote through the nights, her lamp the only light in a house that didn't echo his name. The book began as therapy and became confession. Every page peeled away another layer of guilt, another version of herself she didn't recognize. When she finally sent the manuscript off, she titled it What the Water Took, a memoir about loss, forgiveness, and the price of silence. The publishers called it haunting. Readers called it brave. None of them knew bravery had nothing to do with it. Months later, the first author copy arrived in a cardboard box marked Fragile. Grace opened it carefully, the smell of fresh ink filling the air. Her name on the cover looked foreign, almost borrowed. She poured herself tea, sat by the window, and began to read. Her own words stared back at her, the story of love, betrayal, and drowning secrets. She had changed just enough to protect herself. The world didn't need to know everything. It didn't need to know what really happened on the cliffs that night, or how easily the truth could slip beneath the waves. When she reached the final chapter, she smiled faintly. For the first time it felt finished. Then she turned to the last page. A note had been slipped between the paper, faintly creased. The ink smudged but unmistakable. Her breath caught as she recognized the handwriting. You told them everything, except the part where you pushed her. Her fingers went cold. The room tilted. She read it again, slower this time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder. They didn't. The teacup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. She turned toward the window, toward the sound she shouldn't have heard in this quiet inland town. Waves, distant but distinct. The rhythmic pulse of a sea she had tried to escape. Outside, fog drifted past the trees, thick and white like sea mist. On the glass, droplets began to form. Not rain, but salt water. Grace stepped closer, her reflection fractured in the pane. Behind it, another shadow moved, a man's, and somewhere deep within the fog, the ocean whispered her name. The tide had found her again, because the ocean never forgets. It only waits.